Good morning, Stonehill. So good to see you this morning on this Super Bowl Sunday. Zach probably, I didn't listen to the announcements. Did he just say something about the Super Bowl? Okay, good. So, it's just kind of obligatory. We have to say something about it. Does anybody actually care about the Super Bowl today? All right, how many are voting? You vote for a Super Bowl. How many of you are rooting for the Chiefs? Okay, and then how many of you are rooting for, what's the other team? 49ers? How many of you love God more than even the Super Bowl? There we go. That's what I like to hear. Well, welcome today. We're excited about, I actually like the Super Bowl. It's a great time to hang out with people and just get to know each other. But we're excited about this morning because we are continuing in the series we've been in called Grounded in the Gospel. And if you're a first-time or second-time guest, we're glad you're here. And if you're here, we're glad you're here. So it doesn't matter who you are, we're glad you're here. And we're looking forward to today. As Zach already said, we're excited about the Red Letter Challenge next week. It's going to be good. And the idea of this series is this. What are the things that Jesus talked about that he said that are very important for us? Number one. Number two, what if we actually did those things? And so as we take these next few weeks, we're going to dig down and see some of the words and some of the teachings and the thoughts of Jesus Christ. So two things, as Zach talked about, get in a community group. Okay, we got all kinds of groups. If you're not sure, we got a men's group, we got women's group, we got all these groups, right? And then secondarily, grab the book today, or you can even buy it next week. We won't start the book till February 11th, but grab that, get ready for that. We're excited about that, and don't worry, we're going to take a break from the book of Romans for a while, but we're going to come back, and we'll continue to do that this year as we can progress. And so we'll get through the whole book by the end of the year, but really excited about that. And the Red Letter Challenge is actually a really good time to bring someone with you. Okay, invite someone with you. I get sometimes Romans. I believe that it's a great time to invite somebody with you too for the book of Romans, but I understand how it is. You're like trying to encourage somebody who doesn't go to church. You're like, hey, come study the book of Romans and learn about how big of a sinner you are. I mean, I get like that's maybe not always easy, but I think this next series is actually a great opportunity to bring someone with you to church. But today we continue with this idea of being grounded in the gospel. The gospel, what is the gospel? If you're new with us and you haven't heard us talk about the gospel simply is this. It's the good news about Jesus. It's the story of Christ. It's the story of Jesus taking our place. And so as we study through the book of Romans, we see this time and time again of how Jesus has come and he's given his life for you and I. Now, at our church, Stonehill Church, we have several values. We have at least, we have 7 core values. And one of the core values we have is this, is that we are real, messy people. Real messy people. And so what we say is this, let's just get real. I'm not sure we have actually the graphic. Can we throw that up there real quick? Real messy people. It says, let's just get real, right? We're messy and we're going to embrace the mess. We say things like, it's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay that way. And so people, they hear this, and I feel like this is one of the values at our church that people resonate with the most. Now, there's a couple reasons why people resonate with this value. The first reason, which I think is the good reason, is this. Some resonate with this because we live in a life of guilt and shame and hurt. Things that have happened in the past where we've sinned or we've messed up or someone else has hurt us. And we struggle, and what happens is Satan loves to take that and he loves to beat us down with it. And so what happens, we'll come to an environment like this where we think that maybe everybody else has got it together. In reality, we don't. That we're all messy, that we all struggle in different ways. And the true intention of this value is that no matter what you have done in the past, there is hope. There is hope. We're all messy. And so that's what today is about. So that's the kind of the first way that people resonate with this value. The second way that people can take this value, which is actually the incorrect way, and they take it out of context, and they like this value because it makes them or us feel good about what we're doing. Like it's an excuse to keep on doing what we want or excuse to keep on sinning. It doesn't matter what we do because we're all messy, right? And we can just kind of keep on keeping on. It doesn't matter what God's plan is for us. I mean, think about if Adam and Eve would have taken that approach in the Garden of Eden. They ate that fruit, And God comes to them and said, hey, Adam and Eve, like, look, I have this barrier and this parameter for you. I did not want you to go outside of it, but yet you disobeyed me. And Adam and Eve said, well, I'm sorry, we're just messy, you know? My bad, God. It's not a big deal. And you can see what happens because God at this moment, he showed his justness. He also showed his grace. He was just in the fact that he said, look, there's a consequence to this sin. And so they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden and actually affected all of us from that point forward. Yet at the same time, we see a picture of God's wonderful grace where he actually covered them. He covered them, which was a picture of what was to come with Christ when Jesus came to cover us and our sins. And so we see a parallel. But that idea of like we can just do whatever we want whenever we want is not really the idea of this value. And so today, when we talk about messiness, like what do we mean by that? There's a couple things. First of all, messiness can just be things that have just happened to us that's bad. We did nothing to make that happen. We didn't make the wrong choice, but yet bad things still take place. So that's part of messiness. But then the other part of messiness is what we would call sin. Now, in our culture, we hear that word, and we do not like that. No one's like, yeah, sin is awesome. You know, we don't like to be called or be labeled a sinner, but we really don't know what sin actually is sometimes. What sin simply means is missing the mark. Like, God has a perfect design, a perfect plan, and when we sin, we go against his perfect plan. We miss the mark. That's what sin is. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to filter this value, we're real messy people, through the lens of Romans chapter 3 and ultimately what Paul has to say about our sin problem. And so as you're taking notes, there are three thoughts today. And the first one is this, that we are all in the same messy boat. All of us, same messy boat. And we're going to see that. So if you want to turn to Romans chapter 3 today, we're going to look at verse 9. Again, if you don't have a Bible, we would love to give you a Bible. We have a Bible out there at the guest services tent that you can have for free. But Romans chapter 3, verse 9, and this is what Paul has to say about this idea of sin. He says, what shall we conclude then? Do we have any advantage? Now, when Paul is talking here, he's talking to the Jewish people. If you were here last week, DJ talked about this, that in chapter 2, he's telling to them, and he's kind of talking to them about their religion and their desire to do all the right things. And Paul is kind of saying, look, this is not the whole point of what we're talking about here. You can be as religious as you want to be, but it's not about that. And so he's reminding them again in verse 9. He says, do we have any advantage? As Jewish people, do we have any advantage? And then he says this, not at all. For we have already made the charge that Jews and Gentiles alike are all under the power of sin. Paul starts out and he says, look, guys, we are all in the same place. We all start out the same way. We're all born under sin. We all start out as this cute little swaddling little baby sinner. That's what we are, right? We're born, all of us, like in the movie Nemo, the seagulls. We're born like this. Check this out. This is how we all are. You know what I'm talking about, right? That's how we are all born. Now, what is interesting here is Paul is not saying that we are equal sinners, but we are sinners equally. We're sinners equally. No matter how good you are. In fact, if you think that you are really good and you think you're doing really well, that's probably your sin. Let that explode your head for a moment, okay? And for all the rest of us, because this is the crowd that I would probably fall into, if I were to go up to some people, including myself, and say, hey, look, you're a sinner, you'd probably be like me and say, you don't even know how bad it is. And that's how many of us would fall onto it. And so Paul goes on, and he's really trying to hit this point home in verse 10. And he says, as it is written, there is none righteous, not even one. Not even one. What does the word righteous mean? The word righteous simply means to be in right standing. So when Paul is talking in this context that none of us are righteous, what he's saying that on our own volition, by ourselves, that none of us are in right standing with God. We all start that way. We all begin that way. Think about the best person in your life for a moment, the person that does so many things right. For some of you, it might be your grandma. Sinner. She is a sinner. Wretched, depraved, evil, crooked, grandma sinner, you know? Some of you are sitting by your grandma right now. Some of you are like, I am a grandma, okay? Guess what? You're a sinner. We're all sinners. And Paul goes on and he says, there is no one who understands. No one who seeks God. In our natural human state, none of us naturally have a desire to seek after God, to fulfill the purpose and the plan that God has for us. You say, well, Doug, I do have this desire to seek after God. I would say if that's your desire, if you're here today, or if you live out a desire to seek after God, I would say that desire actually comes from God himself. He gives you that desire to seek after him because in our own natural state, we have no desire, Paul says. And he goes on and he says, all have turned away. They have together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Aren't you glad you came to church today? So exciting. He says they're worthless. The Hebrew word here for worthless is actually used for milk that is soured. Paul is saying that people who are not going after God are kind of compared to their desires and their actions like milk that is soured. You can't do a lot with soured milk. Now, I don't drink a lot of milk, but I drink a lot of coffee with a lot of half and half in it. You know what I'm saying? Anybody with me on that one? I've had some people say, hey, Doug, why do you drink so much half and half with your coffee? And I say, well, because the instructions are on the carton. You know, half and half. You know what I'm saying? So I drink a lot of coffee, and the other day I was drinking some coffee, and you know those little packets that we have out there that have the half and half in them? Well, I just happened to get the lottery, and I got one, and I opened it up, poured it into my good coffee, and all of a sudden it started kind of clumping out. And I watched this, and I'm like, this is disgusting. So what did I do? Obviously, I threw out this coffee. I poured it out. It was ruined. It was worthless. Paul here is describing the human condition, the human being, the man or the woman that wants nothing to do with God. Such a description of what we see in our culture when it comes to entertainment, when it comes to the world's idea of what it means to do and make pleasure happen and us to be happy. We see this in mind with people that have no desire to serve God, or they don't live their life in light of eternity in mind with pleasing the Lord. And so Paul is trying to hammer this home. He's saying that even our good deeds, even the desires that we have in themselves compared to a holy, perfect God, are not even that good. In light of our cosmic treason, in light of our desires of saying, God, I do not need you. I do not want you. I have no desire to do anything with you. Anything we do that is good is really not that good compared to a perfect God. Again, you say, Doug, this is kind of a bummer of a message right now. And I get it, so hold on. We'll turn it around in a second. You say the gospel is supposed to be good news. Like, where's the good news at? I love this quote by R.C. Sproul. He says, the gospel is only good news when we understand the bad news. And that's what Paul is trying to really get us to understand, to really grasp, that we don't understand how good God is and how good his love is for us. And when he sent his son Jesus to die for us, we don't really get that and understand how big of a deal that is until we understand where we sit as human beings. What if you had a guy and he was going to a hotel one day to commit an affair on his wife, and so he walks into the hotel, and before he destroys his family, before he destroys his children and his marriage, he goes into the hotel, and the bellhop, he helps him out, and he kind of gets him into the elevator and takes him to the right spot. And as the bellhop is helping him out, the bellhop is telling this guy his condition. And he's saying, like, I'm struggling and I'm having a rough time in life. And so this man who's about ready to have an affair on his wife, he ends up giving this bellhop a significant amount of money. He tips him really, really well. It's a good deed. He generously tips this guy. But it would be hard to call that deed good in the light of the overall wickedness that this man is about ready to do. What if our rebellion as human beings against God was like that, but a billion times worse? You can serve the poor all you want. You can help those that are desperate and are in need. You cannot murder someone, but in light of our natural desire to say to God, God, I do not want anything to do with you. I have no desire to follow you or to abide by your desire for me. It's kind of like, in many ways, tipping the bellhop. And Paul says, look, guys, there's no one. There's no one that is good, not even one. Some of you might say, but Doug, Oprah tells me that I'm beautiful and I'm special. And I would say, you know what? Oprah's right. In one sense, that we are beautiful. We are special. The Bible tells us that we are fearfully and we're wonderfully made. You and I were created in the image of God. We are wonderful, and God does have a purpose and a design for us. You are special, but at the same time, in the human paradox, we have been tainted by sin. And the taint of sin is greater for the loveliness of our creation. And so, because of this, Paul is trying to really help us grasp this concept here, which is the second thought is this. Because of all the issues, we need to get real about it. We need to get real about it. We need to actually have an understanding of who we are before we can understand how much Christ really loves us. And so Paul goes on and he says, because of your heart, because of your desire, the natural man, our natural desire, he says, this is what happens. He goes on in verse 13, and he says this, their throats, who's there? That's all of us, mankind. Their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. Right now, I want you to look at your neighbor and say, Paul is talking about you right now. And then say, I love you. Okay, good. He goes on, he says this, the poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. So not only what is inside of our hearts comes out of our mouths, but in addition to this, Paul says it begins to affect what we do, how we act. He says, ruin and misery mark their ways, and the way of peace they do not know. See, there's a reason why, as we look at the world, we see violence and wars and problems and issues. It's because the natural state of man, who we are naturally, is a desire to be at war. It's a desire of me. I want this and I want this. And so it affects all of us. And he goes on and he says, there is no fear of God before their eyes. And he's giving us a picture of the man and the woman, the natural man and woman. And you might say, Doug, this is pretty, again, tough. This is a tough one. Right? And you don't really know me, Doug, very well. I'm a pretty good person. And that's the objection that all of us can give at times and say, I'm really not bad, especially when I compare myself to this person. And that's the thing is we can always compare ourselves to someone else to make ourselves better, right? There's always somebody that's worse than us, that sins more than us, that is just more deplorable than we are. And we can look at the nightly news and say, man, I'm so glad I'm not like that. But when it comes to really comparing ourselves to a perfect, holy, just God, we will never be able to stack up. We will never be in comparison. I mean, just for a moment, if we were to kind of go back just to the Ten Commandments, and whether you've been in church for a while or never, you probably at least know some of the Ten Commandments, right? So just for a moment, how well do you think you're doing on just the Ten Commandments? So let's do a little test here for a second. This is a test for you. This is a test for me. I'll just give you like 5 of them here, okay? So one of them says that we are to obey our parents in the Lord, for this is right. I think back to my childhood and like, man, I really messed that one up, right? Anybody ever feel that way? Even right now as a child, like, yeah, there you go. Thanks for being honest there, right? We do that. We're not very good at that one. One of them says this, don't murder. And again, all of us are like, yeah, we got this one, right? I'm good. I've never killed anyone before. And then Jesus comes in and he jacks this one up for us. Because he says if you have hatred in your heart towards someone, it's kind of like murdering someone. And then I'm reminded of every time I'm stuck in the fast lane behind someone who doesn't know what fast actually means, right? And every time I honk that horn, it's like I'm kind of murdering somebody. At least I feel like it. And then he goes on and he says, don't commit adultery. All right, doing pretty good on that one. Jesus says, again though, if you have lust in your heart towards someone else, it's kind of like doing that. Let's move on. And then he says, don't lie. Don't lie. Now, I think a lot of us, it's really subjective. What does that actually mean? But I don't lie, right? Until I go and look at all your Facebook pages, right? Our lives tend to, be a lie sometimes, even on Facebook. And so we struggle with that one. How about this one? Do you guys ever struggle with this one? Do not covet. I struggle with this one every single day. I pull out of my garage and I look at my neighbor right over here and I look at my other neighbor over here and they both have sweet 4-door Jeep Wranglers, all jacked up. Every single day I struggle with coveting. Maybe I'm the only one here that does that, right? But for a second, how are you doing with all these? Are any of you saying, I'm killing it, man, I'm crushing it? Anybody like that? If you are, you probably are dealing with pride. And so that's a whole nother issue. We're all struggling with something here. You see, the real problem is not that you and I tell lies, or the real problem isn't that you and I cheat, or that we gossip, or we're disobedient, or we covet. The heart of the problem is really an actual heart problem. And that's what Paul's trying to get at here. He's not trying to just pick on individual sins. He's giving examples of how we go against God. But what his point is trying to make it really clear is that all of us, at the end of the day, we have a heart problem. Which leads into our last thought is this, that we all need someone bigger than ourselves. We can't do it on our own. There's no way. So he goes on in verse 19. And he says, now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be silenced and the whole world held accountable to God. What Paul is trying to tell us here is that one day, it doesn't matter if you are a Jew or a Gentile, or it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, you're old, you're young, you're black or white. We all will be held accountable for who we are and our actions and what we choose and choose not to do. Paul says it doesn't matter who you are. We will all be held accountable. And then he goes on and says, therefore, no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. He's like, you cannot do enough. You cannot follow the law in a way that's acceptable to God. There's no way. There's only one person that has ever done that, Paul would say. It was Jesus. but you and I, we cannot do this. And he says, rather, though the law, we become conscious of our sin. So here what Paul is doing is Paul is saying the law, by following the law, by doing all the right things, to be religious, to do all the good deeds that we can possibly do, will never be enough. Following the law. So why do we have the law? Paul would say, well, here's why we have the law. Because the law actually shows us that we have a problem. So what's the law? We talk about the law. Well, the law is actually referring to the Old Testament, kind of the rules and the parameters that God set for the nation of Israel. So we think of the law, like the Ten Commandments are part of the law. We look at the book of Leviticus, has a lot of the law. And that's what Paul is referring to, because he's talking to an audience that would know what the law is. And he's saying, you cannot do enough of the law to be made right in God's sight on your own. 2 months ago, I went to the hospital. I talked about this last week a little bit, but I was having some stomach problems. It was really hurting, a lot of pain, and I wasn't sure what was happening. So we went to the ER, got to the ER, and again, issues, problems. And so they couldn't figure out what it was, and so they thought it would be fun for me to spend like $2,500 to go get a CAT scan, okay? So I go, and they take me in there to get a CAT scan. And when I took the CAT scan, what it showed me when they got the pictures back was that I had a bad gallbladder. It was bad. So it was worth it, I guess, because they would not have known that I had a bad gallbladder unless I would have gotten the CAT scan. Now, the problem with the CAT scan is that it could not fix the problem. There's no way that it could fix the problem, but yet at the same time, it was very useful because it showed me what the problem was. That's what Paul is saying when it comes to God's law. God's law is like a CAT scan for our hearts. That every time we break the law, we lie, we cheat, we have bad thoughts, we gossip, the law is a CAT scan showing us the problem. So we're here today and we're like, okay, cool, Doug. So like, this is awesome. Are you basically saying that we are hosed? Like there's no hope? Like what's the point of all of this? Well, that's the beauty of it all. It shows us how incomplete we are, yet at the same time how good Christ is. And so he goes on in verse 22, and here's where the hope is. And we'll end with this today. He says, this righteousness, the right standing with God, is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. So we realize that we are messy, that we are sinners, that we have problems. Yet at the same time, the gospel is the most inclusive yet exclusive belief that there is. It's exclusive in the sense that there's only one way to God according to the Bible, according to this verse. And that way to God is through Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone. That He is the way, that He is the truth, He is the life, and no one comes to the Father but by Jesus. But at the same time, it's very inclusive because it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you have done. It doesn't matter how messy your life is. It doesn't matter where you've been. That if you believe on Jesus, that He is the answer, that you too, that I can be made right with God, to have a relationship with an almighty, perfect, just God. This right standing is not found in the law. It's not found in what we do. It's not found in religion. It's not found in any of those things. It's found in Christ alone. And it's not just about getting to go to heaven, although that's part of it. It starts in this life. Some of you look at your life right now and you're struggling. It's hard. It's difficult. You feel like you're hitting up against the wall, and it could be simple things. You can get mad at the fact that Netflix isn't putting any new shows out, right? And you're struggling with that. For some of you, it's a little deeper. You struggle with Addiction. Addiction to food, addiction to shopping, addiction to the approval of people, addiction to pills, addiction to the bottle. For some of you, it might not be an addiction, but your parenting is in a crisis right now, and you're struggling with your kids. For some of you, it could be your marriage. And you're like, man, I don't know what to do. Is there any hope? Can I say this? That maybe those things aren't the real issue. That those things are actually the byproduct of the real issue. The real issue is that we haven't really, truly tuned into Christ and given him complete control of our life in every single area. I love this quote from Tim Keller. He says this. He said, God's salvation does not come in response to a changed life, but a changed life comes in response to the salvation offered as a free gift. We get this wrong so many times, don't we? Because we're worried about the exterior. We're worried about changing all the outside stuff and then hoping that it will change the inside, but it doesn't work that way. It starts from the inside, and God begins to move and shape our heart, realizing that we cannot do it on our own, no matter how hard we try, that we need someone bigger than ourselves. And maybe we need to realize just truly how messy we are, so that we can finally say, okay, I can't do this on my own. God, I need you. I cannot save myself. And there's nothing else that will do. It's only you, God. I need you. Can we pray together right now? God, we are so thankful. We're thankful for your truth, Lord, and sometimes it's really hard to hear it. It's hard to take it in because we don't like that. We don't like to be wrong. We don't like to know that there are problems, because sometimes that means we have to do something different. And right now, I believe that there's so many of us in this room that either we're all in, we're fully bought in, we make mistakes still, but we're charging forward in our relationship with you. Praise God for everyone that is in that season of life right now. Thank you, Lord, for that. Then I feel like there are some people here today that are kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Like, yeah, I love God. I want a relationship with you, God, but I just don't know if I want to give everything up right now. And then there are people here today that are just like, I don't know. I didn't know what I was getting into when I came today. I had no clue that I was at this point in my life that we as the human race have these problems and these issues. But today, I'm feeling this sense that there's something bigger than all of us. And we need someone bigger to truly help us fix our situation. So today, I just pray and help us to realize and understand, Lord, it is all about you. Nothing else will do.